Okay, we're rolling.
All right, hello everybody.
Yeah, we started with advocacy.
Hi. So anybody's here to talk yesterday on DarkNet?
Yeah, that's true.
All right, then I guess we'll do a little bit of a lead in on DarkNet. I don't have these gentlemen in the middle already. Sorry. It's all good. Cheers. Thanks, man. All right, so this is zeroaltitude on command code. We run a contest every year at DEFCON called DC DarkNet. We're going to take you guys through a little bit of history of ciphers today. Yesterday we gave a talk on how we go about running the DarkNet. It's the second largest contest run at DarkNet every year, only second to the actual DEFCON contest itself. So we're going to go through a brief thing of ciphers and then get some audience participation on solving some of these. So throughout history there's been a nice battle between code makers and code breakers. So we're going to take a little short history through these. So some early ciphers date back to early Egyptian days. Caesar had the Caesar cipher. He did this because he was terrified that somebody was going to kill him. So he encrypted messages back and forth. They're actually not really encrypted. It was pretty light encryption. To prevent treason from his own, I guess they didn't call them cabinets back then. And then the ancient Greeks used something called a cytail. Basically, it was written on pieces of paper, and if you wrapped it around a appropriately sized stick, essentially, it would spell out what the actual orders were for the troops on the field. Some medieval ciphers. So, an interesting story back in the 1586, in October 15th, 1586, the Queen Mary of the Scots was tried for treason to Queen Elizabeth. She was being held because the accusation was that she was being treasonous towards the Queen and plotting her death. Well, she actually was attempting to do that. And but she was really just a figurehead for a group of noblemen that were Catholic, and Queen Elizabeth was Protestant, and they were trying to get her out. However, Queen Elizabeth was certain that Queen Mary was certain that her communications weren't being tracked because she was encrypting her cipher, encrypting her messages back and forth, actually known as the Queen Mary cipher. However, the person that pushed or prosecuted her was actually also the spy master for England at the time, and was able to decrypt their message and write them back to her while she was on trial. And then, I think it was a little less than a year later, she was beheaded. This is actually the cipher that it was. It was cracked by doing a simple frequency analysis of what the most frequent symbols were, and then trying to figure out what the words meant from there. But all her messages to those noblemen about how to go about to kill off Queen Elizabeth was encrypted like this. Popularity of ciphers over the years then grew, and in the 1800s, Edgar Allan Poe's one of the first things he wrote was written in the Philadelphia Dollar newspaper, where he wrote a Goldberg cipher and put it out there. This fueled a whole bunch of cipher messages every week in different newspapers, that sort of thing. Again, easily broke what is frequency analysis. As the population grew, I'm going to say his name again because I'm going to screw it up. Benier, thank you. Created a cipher back in the 1500s, oddly the same year that Queen Mary was put on trial. It stood for about 300 years. It was cracked in 1854 by Charles Babbage. The strength of this cipher was the fact that it uses 26 different one-time pads, essentially, to do the lookups. So if you both had the same one-time pad, and you knew what the key word was, you could decrypt the messages together. This is one of the, you can have any of them, but this is the most common used block. So any one of 26 in both directions, and you basically use the keyword to look up the letters of each the letters go down the right-hand side, and the letter that you're trying to spell out goes across the top. And you look up the letter in the cube, essentially.
Sorry. So with that little bit of history, there's actually a reason for that as well. That if you want to, we'll scroll backward or forward in the deck later. There's some hints there as to what we're doing. So what I'm going to do now is actually present to you a cipher that we developed for the DarkNet last year, and invite you to solve it. And again, this can be interactive, so we're going to try to go through the presentation part as quickly as possible. But then, you know, if you'd like, we could just work through some of these things. So this cipher was part of a business card, this is a picture of the business card, and the critical bit are the gold numbers here. So it's worth pondering what that sequence of numbers might be. I'll just leave it up for a second here. Like I said, we can go back to it later as well. And I'm happy, again, if we decide that it's difficult to do this in the format of a 30-minute interactive thing, we can just walk through it, and I can walk you through how it went, just for funsies, because I think it's interesting how ciphers get developed as well. Here is the actual cipher that the gold numbering is meant to solve. Now, these are a sequence of clocks. Clocks are pretty cool. I like clocks. What's interesting about a clock is in this case, a 12-hour clock, 12 full hours of seconds, which, as you all know, is 43,200 seconds. Very relevant to this cipher. I'm realizing the limitations of this format when it comes to interactively solving this. So let me plow forward, and then we'll go back and walk you through this stuff so we can talk about how this was designed, why we came up with this design, and why the interesting part. It's very easy to come up with a cipher that's almost impossible to crack in a short amount of time, right? The interesting and fun part of it is to come up with a cipher that is solvable, but is hard to solve. Easy ciphers are easy. Really almost impossible ciphers are pretty easy. Ciphers that are solvable and fun is hard. Now, relevant to the clock puzzle is base arithmetic. Base arithmetic is interesting, and I think a lot of people take it for granted. So let's just walk through how numbers kind of work, because it's kind of cool. When you have a sequence of digits, in this case these are binary digits, the way it works is that each progressive place is a place of the base number to the next power, right? So you've got, in this case, 2 to the 0th power is the 1's place, 2 to the 1st power is the 2's place, 2 to the 2nd power is the 4th place, and so on and so forth. And that's how binary numbers work. They're sums of the multiplication of the number in that place times the place that they're in. Just like the tens. Base 10 numbers are, again, a sequence of 10 to the power of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1's place, 10's place, 100's place, 1000's place. So to get the number out of the base system that you have, you multiply the number in the base position times its base, and you add them all together to get the numbers. Now, bases can be pretty tricky, actually. Like, what about negative bases? How do those work? Well, they work the exact same way, and they're only tricky because it's kind of mind-bending to think of how this works. But if you think about it, what's negative 4 to the power of 0 is still the 1's place. Then the next place is what? Negative 4 to the power of 1, which will be the negative 4's place. So in this numbering system, there are no numbers designated with a negative sign because the numbering system itself covers all of the negative and positive numbers in one positive-looking sequence, which is pretty interesting and potentially useful for a lot of different kinds of calculations. So again, if you were to solve these would be another piece of the puzzle. But let me, again, continue mowing through this, and then let's go back and interactively solve the whole thing, shall we? So this talk ends with this interesting piece of ciphertext, which all of the clues that we've devised up till now uncode. So are you okay with me just walk through the actual. So cool. So let's go back a little ways here and talk about this first cipher. This cipher, that gold lettering or numbering is a sequence of numbers that should be familiar. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 29. Those are the first 26. Fibonacci is 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Primes, that's correct. The first, and if you counted them out, you'd discover that they were 26, which is a pretty interesting puzzle piece because 26 is a special number to us. It's the number of letters that we've got. So that's kind of cool. So that tells you something about what these numbers are supposed to mean. These clock faces then remind me because I'm weird. I think of myself, I'm like, okay, cool. So I've got a bunch of prime numbers. What do I know about prime numbers? They have unique decomposition into a series of numeric bases when you do prime factorization of them. And so immediately to my mind comes the idea of how can I really compactly represent really huge numbers so I can multiply all the primes together that I'm going to need to spell something out. And what comes to mind first when you think about compact number representation? Well, of course, clocks. Clocks come to mind because I can represent a base 43,200 number by just using a sequence of clocks rather than writing really giant decimal numbers everywhere. So I made a bunch of clocks. Simple. So now there's also a question, who here knows what big endian numbers are versus little endian numbers? Can somebody give a description?
Yeah, the big endian means you're going to, on the left side, is the biggest number. Little endian, because on the little side, it has to do with the whole little fusions where the egg was the big side.
Exactly. So to repeat just for the microphone, big endian numbers have their largest significant digits on the left for us Anglophiles, and little endian numbers have their smallest significant digits on the left. These are little endian base 43,200 numbers. What happens here is there's a sequence of words, and here's how the words are formed. Each word takes the letter that is in the word. If it's in the first place, say there's a W in the first place, I go and I find the W, X, Y, Z, the 23rd prime, and I put it in the prime factors once to represent the first digit. I find the second letter, H, which is the 8th letter of the alphabet, and so I put the 8th prime number in twice to represent it's the second digit, and so on for subsequent digits. So for each place of the digit, I put that many more of the ordinal prime represented by that number, and I multiply them all together, and I get ridiculously large numbers. And so then I write them in base 43,200 and use the relevant number and make a clock out of it. Of course. Why would anybody do anything otherwise? Right? So I wonder if there's a way I can... So it turns out that this cipher is a URL. Oh, cool. Yeah. And it's face feed, which is EDFA, EDFE.html. And when you go there, you realize that you don't have an internet connection, and that's not going to help you very much. That's disappointing. Here there would have been a very simple message, which would look like an encrypted sequence of characters, a very small one though, and it's very simple. It's row 13, the Caesar cipher, which we were talking about earlier in the slide deck, and that's where the connection back to the story begins to happen. Guessing that it's row 13 immediately gives you English words that say, his killer. Now his is not bound to anything yet, except the fact that it's a Caesar cipher, and we were talking about the treason of Caesar. And so you might guess that the answer is Brutus, which is the answer. So good job.
You can refresh.
Oh, awesome. Allegedly,
There you go.
I'm connected to the internet.
Is that your phone? That's my phone.
I don't. Oh wait. It's a little tricky to figure out how to make that refresh. Oh wait, maybe I can right click. Yes. Well, mixed success. Oh, it's connecting. I'm sure that's the payoff is imminent.
Maybe you should reboot.
It's not a Windows machine.
Rebooting would also solve the problem, but in a different way, because it would never come back on video again. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation somehow.
More beer would solve the problem.
More beer would solve the problem. So cool. Now we have a clue. The clue is Brutus. We got that by solving the clock puzzle, which of course wouldn't have taken you guys any amount of time. And then we found the row 13, which is trivial. His killer, Brutus. We're awesome. We're in good shape now. Now we now have all the puzzle pieces that we need in order to solve the very last piece of the puzzle here. But let's imagine. Let's actually would like to go back to is the once we do get back there. It's very complicated. Oh, yeah, present. There you go. Okay, cool, awesome. This is working again. So now we have the base numbers, and it turns out that there's another puzzle right here. This puzzle again is solvable given the tools that we've been already taught here in the slide deck. Turns out that the numbers 10, 15, 1586 pop up here. And since you all have eidetic memories, I'm sure you remember that this was the date mentioned previously on slide 3, in which the date that Mary Queen of Scots was accused of treason, was tried for treason, occurred. And this reminds us of that part of the story. So that's pretty cool too, right? So now we have Brutus, a treasonous member of Caesar's court, and the date of the trial for treason of Mary Queen of Scots. And we ask ourselves, what are these guys trying to tell us? Well, they might be trying to tell us that treason is going to be something relevant to solving the puzzle, which, oh my gosh, that's exactly right. You guys are doing amazing. Now, this cipher here, which is now obscured by white, that puzzle here is a different cipher than the one that we were trying before. And if you were to do a little bit of like cursory analysis of it, you might realize immediately that it's not row 13, it's not row 14, it's none of those. But again, since you're clever and paying attention, you realize that we've mentioned one other historically relevant and super interesting cipher in this presentation, which is the Vigenère, or Vigenère. And, oh yeah. So putting these things together, you come to the conclusion, of course, that treason is the key that tells you which rows to use in which order in the Vigenère. And you then plug this in and you get Sic semper tyrannis, which is a famous quotation said by... Sorry? No, close. Or was it?
No.
Not in this case. It was also said by John Wilkes Booth upon the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, a famous treasonous act. And that's the payoff. You got it. Good.
Anyway, if you guys like this kind of thing, this is what DEFCON is. So DEFCON is essentially, or what DarkNet is anyway. So at DEFCON every year, thank you. At DEFCON every year, we have 27 to 30 some odd quest lines, at least a dozen of them follow this type of pattern. Other ones follow learn to solder kits, so we make a badge every single year. Should actually be able to go up and show you guys a picture of the badges.
A couple more.
So those are the badges that we did for the last 4 years now. So started on the far right and progressed, and this year will be will significantly top all of those, given the amount of effort we've put into it thus far. But there's quests on the badges, so there's actually a learn to solder. Once you learn to solder, all the badges have a unique ID. There's usually some sort of quest to get the unique ID out. Some of them go all the way to doing the silly thing of plugging into your USB, and all of a sudden it becomes a keyboard. Probably should never do that, by the way. Then a couple years ago we had, last 2 years we've had RFID challenges by building an RFID cloner, and then having 6 or 7 of the contest runners having bracelets on that you had to clone each one of them, and then walk up to a station and get through, act like you're opening up a door with them. Lockpicking one, sign language one. It's basically a big text-based MMO that every time you complete one, you get points. And 2 of the last 3 years, we've been awarded the black badge. And if you know what that is in DEFCON, that means you get free entry to DEFCON for life, and usually an interview with the NSA right afterwards. So pros and cons to that one. If you guys are interested in this deck, I'll throw this image up. There, that's the link to the deck. You guys want to see it? I think that takes us almost to time. What questions you guys have? No questions. Communicated perfectly. All right.
I don't know if it's a question, but I was at 22 when I got this. So this is this generation of badge.
Yeah, it's ours.
So yeah, exactly. This is
Nice.
From, yeah.
I did all the firmware for that one.
I like the DarkNet was actually my favorite part of the con. I like that better than most of the rest of the con. So I'm looking forward to being back there this year and see what we got.
If you guys really want to find out some not inside information, but at least some details of what it's like, if you go to Hack5's website, we were interviewed last year with Zero and I for about 15-20 minutes on the history of DarkNet, why we did it, that sort of thing. We are by far the second largest, by 5x the next contest behind us.
We also, at dcdark.net, we have our site online now, and about a month before the con, we put up a mini challenge there, which is very puzzly. It's completely online, so we walk you through a sort of a micro experience of what the DarkNet's like, and I love anybody who wants to come and try it. I happen to really love trying to develop hard but solvable ciphers, and so I like talking about that, and I like anybody who wants to come and see it, please drop by.
Yes, sir.
Are you guys part of or affiliated with the Sin Shop in Henderson?
So there's in where? Henderson. So one of our members and close friends is one of the guys that runs it, Crux.
Yeah.
So Jeff, yeah, I spend many hours with him every year because he does. Last several years, he's done most of the board layout. This year, we split it up about 50-50. I'm doing before I did all the firmware, and he did all the hardware. This year, I wanted to get a bit deeper into the hardware, so I've done about 50% of it. He's done about 50% of it. But we spend between the months of about end of April till August, we spend more time together than we really want to. I think that's a reasonable statement. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I really like that you just said hard but solvable ciphers. I'm the next speaker, so FYI, if you go over into my time, I won't be offended. What is your process for deciding when it's too hard and when it's too solved?
Considering we came up with 4 in the last 24 hours because we forgot to do it before we got here, that's probably a good question. Go ahead, man.
So I can talk about the way I think about it. So Yesterday at the talk we gave in track 1, I spoke a lot about context. So to me, creating a hard but solvable cipher is primarily not about the mechanics that you use to get the cipher in or out. I mean, clocks, whatever, it's fine. It's really about the context that you set. So, for example, on the card, the fact that the first 26 primes are illuminated might give you an idea. Something else that might happen in some other quest line in the DarkNet might have been that somebody talked about base arithmetic. In fact, I wrote a quest line about base arithmetic. So if you were setting yourself up for success, you would immerse yourself in all the context that's been offered. So hard to solvable ciphers to me are about 1, having a context that's settable, 2, doing the right direction. So for example, in the case of the cards, there were hints that were provided, and when people were getting closer and closer, more and more people started to trade information. So we also like to socialize. We have and encourage group chatter, just like the badge challenge at DEF CON. If you don't know it, all throughout the con at DEF CON, there are clues in all the artwork, on all the programs, in all the materials, the badges you get. And people are encouraged to just share that freely because there's no way to put all the context together by yourself. Now, in our case, we're more limited. We bring that context into the DarkNet, but then we have that. And then the second thing is to choose what I would call a relatable mechanic. In this case, base arithmetic, maybe not that relatable, but for computer scientists and people who might be near you doing this other stuff, that's very familiar. And so there's a knowledge source right nearby that's familiar with that kind of mechanic. The one I'm going to do for this year is going to be similarly geeky, but not quite as relating to weird math. But does that help at all?
Great. I'll add to that a little bit. Previous to my current industry, I spent 15 years in the video game industry. And one of the things I learned is that nobody that buys your game enjoys playing what is a designer thinking game. That's not a fun game. So you have to provide, just like Zero said, enough context. The other thing I think we do pretty well at the DarkNet is we have 2 separate story writers that write the entire story, and then we wrap the quests around the story when we're done. So the story actually has hints in for every single quest as you go through it. A couple of other things about DarkNet. Like last year, we actually had the kind of climax of the story was the agents, the good guys, needed to solve enough quests to keep the firewall up while the Mad Hatter was trying to hack into the DarkNet. There was a group of 30, 40 people sitting up till 4 o'clock in the morning trying to defend off solving these things. And the easy puzzles were like 5 points, the harder ones were like 100 points. So they had a whole organization going of like, you guys solve the easy ones, well, we're going to go off and try to solve this hard one. We'll try to, it was awesome to watch. So the social aspect of it is something that I think the group is pretty proud of. Any last questions before we make sure that this guy gets all his time?
I can talk today. You don't want me up.
All right. Cool.
Very good.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.